The history of tourism and hospitality. Early tourism, travel, and exploration are basic to human nature. Man has traveled since the earliest time, although the term tourism was used only in the 19th century. Tourism is derived from the Hebrew word Torah, which means studying, learning, and searching. Tourism can trace its ancestry in the Old Testament. Noah with his ark must have been the first large-scale operator. Even though his passengers were mostly animals, there are numerous references to caravans and trades in the Old Testament. Chapter 26 and 27 of the book of Ezekiel describe trade and commerce in ancient Tyre and recount the travels abroad made by merchants. Early tourism has two forms: travel for business, such as trading, and religious travel. Throughout history, merchants have traveled extensively in order to trade with other nations and tribes. The invention of money, writing, and wheel by the Sumerians facilitated travel and exchange of goods. At this time, there was also travel for private purposes. Example are the Olympic Games held by 776 BC by the Greeks, as well as the travel by rich Romans for enjoyment to visit friends and relatives. The Roman travelers was largely aided by improvement in the communications, first-class roads, and inns for runners or modern hotels. Tourism in the medieval period. During the medieval period, travel declined. Travel derived from the world travail became burdensome, dangerous, and demanding during this time. After the decline of the Roman Empire in the 5th century, roads were not maintained and they became unsafe. Thieves inflicted harm on those who were dared to travel. No one during this time traveled for pleasure. Crusaders and pilgrims were the only ones who traveled. Tourism during the Renaissance and Elizabethan eras. With the Renaissance, a few renowned universities developed so that the travel by education was introduced largely by the British. Travel for education became popular in the 16th century. Under Elizabeth, young men seeking position in court were encouraged to travel to the continent to widen their education. This practice was gradually adopted by others in the lower social scale. In time, it became recognized that the education of a gentleman should be completed by a grad tour of the cultural centers of the continent, which is lasted for 3 years. The term was used as early as 1670. While apparently educational, the appeal became social. Pleasure-seeking young men of leisure traveled predominantly through France and Italy to enjoy the cultures and social life in Europe, with Venice, Florence, and Paris as the key attractions. By the end of the 18th century, the practice had become institutionalized for the upper class society. As young men sought intellectual improvement in the continent, the Sikhs sought a remedy for the illnesses in spas. As a young man sought intellectual improvement in the continent, the Sikhs sought a remedy for their illnesses in spas or medical bath. The term spa is derived from the Walloon word spa, meaning fountain. Turnbridge Wells in Kent became famous as a spa in the 1960s. Travelers immersed themselves in the healing waters. Soon, entertainment was added and dozens of watering places became resort hotels. Bath in England, Baden-Baden in Germany, Baden in Australia, Bstm in France, Lucca in Italy, and Carlsbad and Marienbad in Bohemia became fashionable in the 18th and 19th century. Tourism during the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution brought about major changes in the scale and type of tourism development. It brought about not only technological changes but also essential social changes that made travel desirable as a recreational activity. The increase in productivity, regular employment, and growing urbanization gave more people the motivation and opportunity to go on a holiday. The emerging middle class combined higher incomes and growing education into annual holidays to escape from their responsibilities and the crowded city environment. They traveled to the country they traveled to the countryside or a seahorse for their holidays. This led to the creation of working class resorts near major industry centers. Modern tourism. Tourism in the 19th century. Two technological development in the early part of the 19th century had a great effect on the growth of tourism. These were the introduction of the railway and the development of steam power. Modern tourism. Tourism in the 19th century. Two technological development in the early part of the 19th century had a great effect on the growth of tourism. These were the introduction of the railway and the development of steam power. The railroads created not only more business by providing reliable and cheap transportation, but also more competition as various private companies invested heavily in hotels, resort, and entertainment facilities. Thus, tourism was transformed from a small business catering to the elite into the start of a mass market. That is, travel by a large number of individuals. The use of steam power provided the increased mobility needed by the tourism business. Streamers on the major rivers provided reliable and expensive transportation that led to the popular day trip, cruises, and the growth of the coastal resorts near large industrial towns. As tourism became organized in the later years of the 19th century, the organization of travel became an establishment institution.